first time that Genesis 1 through 3 is all unified, that all of that material comes from Plato's Bible. The cosmic God of Genesis 1 is not Yahweh who appears in Genesis 2 and throughout much of the rest of the
argues
Bible.
that the creation of the world in Genesis 1 and the story of the first human in Genesis 2 and 3 both draw directly on Plato's famous account of the origins of the universe, a story that he heard from a very old man. And this story is about Solomon. Hello everybody and welcome back to our channel. Please subscribe for more videos that I am creating for you people, and today we have one of the great historians and biblical scholar, Russell Gmirkin. So thank you very much, Russell Gmirkin, sir, and how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing just great today.
Okay, that was fascinating to read your book, Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible. And I think that is your second book.
It is.
Okay, all right. So, first of all, you are an independent researcher and a well-known Dead Sea Scrolls and biblical scholar. Your 2006 book, Berosus in Genesis, Manetho, and Exodus, proposed that the Jewish scholars wrote the Pentateuch around 270 BCE at the Great Library of Alexandria, drawing on various Greek historical sources found there. That is something interesting. We will come to this later. Your 2017 book, Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible, identifies Plato's laws as a key source for Mosaic law and for the notion of the Bible as authoritative national literature. Currently in 2022, your book, Plato's Timaeus and the Biblical Creation Accounts, discusses Greek scientific sources, especially Plato's Timaeus, used in the opening chapters of Genesis. But before getting into questions and some things that I found while reading Plato and your book, and also about the history of Jewish Bible, would you like to tell us about your new book, Plato's Timaeus and the Biblical Creation Accounts, that I think will be available for purchase on 3rd of May? But before, let me read the introduction that I found on the publisher's website. So your book, Plato's Timaeus and the Biblical Creation Accounts, argues that the creation of the world in Genesis 1 and the story of the first human in Genesis 2 and 3 both draw directly on Plato's famous account of the origins of the universe, mortal life, and evil containing equal parts science, theology, and myth. This study provides a fascinating approach to Genesis that will interest students and scholars in both biblical and classical studies, philosophy, and Christian narratives. Now, would you like to add something more in this?
Certainly. In the past, biblical scholars have believed that there are two independent creation accounts in early Genesis. Genesis 1 described the creation of the whole universe and planets and stars and everything. Genesis 2 through 3 was the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And they thought that these were two separate creation stories created at different times. But my new book is going to show for the first time that Genesis 1 through 3 is all unified, that all of that material comes from Plato's Timaeus, who had a cosmic creator of the whole universe, the perfect universe, and then who delegated the creation of mortal life to his sons and daughters, little gods, Greek gods running around on the face of the earth. They weren't cosmic creators like he was. They were gods with bodies living in different lands. And the same with the Hebrew Bible. The cosmic God of Genesis 1 is not Yahweh who appears in Genesis 2 and throughout much of the rest of the Bible. That is a local terrestrial God who lives on the earth, lives in Eden, has lunch with Abraham and Sarah, um, who travels the wilderness with the people of the Exodus. It's one of the 70 local terrestrial gods. So this is going to be a very radical book. No one has ever suggested that these are two different gods before, and seeing Yahweh in terms of a local terrestrial god, and not the cosmic God that we all seem to believe in today. So it will be kind of a shock to the scholarly community, I hope, and get people thinking more and really reading the biblical account carefully. It took me about 5 years to write, so I'm glad it's done, and I'm proud of it.
Okay. But then let's talk about a bit about Plato's Timaeus. So we know this is Plato's dialogue that gives us an idea of what is the Cretan theory back then in ancient Greece. So the dialogue starts with some ideas of republic, like the nature of a state and how to form a good state. And here again, we find Socrates discussing with the people. So Socrates wants to know about the history, and so he asks the others to tell him because they, what he suppose, are the most qualified. Now, Critias wants to work out first on this, and he narrates a story that he heard from a very old man. And this story is about Solon, when he visited the Egyptian delta at the head of which the river Nile divides. And we know from this that the story Critias is going to tell is from Egypt. And here we also find the description of the first man. So would you like to elaborate a bit about this a bit?
Yes, the story of Critias is continued in Plato's book called Critias, and it's the story of Athens and Atlantis in ancient primordial times. Now, Atlantis, according to Plato, started out perfect, wonderful, ruled by the gods, and with a divine government, and noble in every respect. But through time, its rulers kept on intermarrying with ordinary mortals, and so they became more and more mortal and like the rest of us, and their government degenerated, and ultimately they decided to invade the Mediterranean. And so there's this war between Athens and Atlantis. Now, the question is this Atlantis story a complete myth that Plato made up, or did he get any of it actually from Egypt? And I think it's possible that Plato, who did spend a little time in Egypt, could have been told by the Egyptian priests about the invasion of the Sea Peoples in the time of Ramses, which was, there were, lots and lots of different tribes that invaded Egypt and the Mediterranean, and it's pictured in reliefs. And that could have been the basis for the myth of Atlantis. But otherwise, Plato makes everything up because it's all to illustrate his theories of perfect government and how humans need the gods to rule over them.
We also find that the Egyptians and Greeks both have goddess Athena in common, and also that there was a long relationship between the Greeks and the Egyptians.
Yes, that's true. Which is historically true up to a point. There were mercenaries, Greek mercenaries from Asia Minor who served under, around the time of Pharaoh Necho and a couple others in, I think, the 500s BC. So there were contacts between Greeks and Egyptians. The Greeks were fond of identifying their gods with the gods of other lands because they wanted all the gods to get along, and they'd say, Athena is kind of like the Egyptian god Neith, and so on and so forth. So they kind of went back and forth as to who borrowed what god from whom. But they were all pretty friendly, and the Greeks had a port on the, I believe, the Delta with traders. So yeah, there were some interactions starting maybe in the 500s BC.
That is quite interesting. And we also find the place called Atlantis. Now, there are tons of research going on about this. And I want to ask you this question because this is making it difficult to understand the history. So what is the mystery behind this island? And can we find a similar place in any other historical record, or is it just in Plato's works? Can we link it to any biblical narrative?
I don't think so. Well, yes, yes and no. I mean, the Bible does not talk about Atlantis per se, but Plato's story of Atlantis does appear to have been used in the early chapters of Genesis. Plato's Atlantis was ruled by Poseidon, the god of the sea and the god of earthquakes. And he married this beautiful human girl named Plato, and they had all sorts of offspring, Atlas and Gadara and all the different rulers of Atlantis. Now, Atlantis was a paradise with gardens and trees and rivers and temples. And my book will show that the biblical description of the Garden of Eden draws on Plato's Critias in a lot of details. And also Genesis 6 that talks about how the sons of God looked on the daughters of men and found that they were beautiful and married them and had offspring, the Nephilim, the giants, who were men of renown in ancient times. All of that comes out of the Critias, where a god married a beautiful woman and had offspring that were kind of semi-divine. And they've looked and looked and looked for the source behind this strange passage in Genesis 6 that talks about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. Nobody has looked at Plato and Critias before because they thought Genesis was so much older than Plato's writings. But I don't share that premise. So I looked at texts that most biblical scholars aren't even on their horizon. And there are just so many systematic parallels. So really, a lot of that comes out of Plato's story of Atlantis. Atlantis also ended in a flood. It was sunk with earthquakes and rains, and very much like the biblical account. And the Greeks, the Mesopotamians, a lot of them had flood stories. But Plato's Critias is the only flood story where the lead god creates a world flood for ethical reasons, because the humans were being wicked. None of the other ones in Greece, the flood of Deucalion or the Gilgamesh epic in Mesopotamia, none of those have an ethical element. That's just in common between Plato and Critias. So from here on out, after my book is published, biblical scholars are going to have to talk about Atlantis if they're going to talk about early Genesis, which I find somewhat amusing and enjoyable.
Thank you very much, Russell Gmirkin, for joining us, for accepting our invitation.
Sure.
And in the end, I would like to thank you, and I would like you to end this by telling us anything you think is important for us to know.
Well, I think that The ancient world is filled with mysteries. Our beliefs and traditions, we believe a lot of things to have happened back then that may or may not have happened as we received them. So we have to really think through and question and challenge our own sets of beliefs and the beliefs of scholars that live today, and use critical thinking and try and figure out what's true and what isn't. And I think there's amazing historical revelations that we're learning. It's an exciting time in scholarship. And, I'm happy to play a small role in it.
Okay, thank you very much, Russell Gmirkin. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.